PR Connections Radio presents.
Welcome to Vegas Hockey Hub here on PRConnectionsRadio.com, the voice of new media. I'm your host, Ian Rachiele, and we have a very good show planned for you tonight as we are going to be breaking down the upcoming offseason for your Vegas Golden Knights and address an important question. And the important question is going to be, will your Vegas Golden Knights re-sign pretty much a face of the franchise, a guy who has been a leader of the Vegas Golden Knights, someone who's a fan favorite here? We're going to be addressing the question for this upcoming offseason. Will the Vegas Golden Knights re-sign Jonathan Marchessault? And this is definitely going to be a good conversation we are going to be having here on Vegas Hockey Hub. And before we get into that, I just want to quickly say to everyone watching all around the world, go to PRConnectionsRadio.com. Check out all the content we have on there. We have about a dozen shows on the network, including Vegas Hockey Hub. So if you want to go to the website and check out all the content, including Vegas Hockey Hub, I highly recommend doing so. If you also want to go to the YouTube channel and subscribe, that would be great for PR Connections Radio. And lastly, if you want to go on to our social media at Vegas Hockey Hub, we do game recaps. We also do live streams as well. There's a bunch of content we put on Vegas Hockey Hub, on the Twitter, on X as well. So I will say for everyone watching all around the world, if you want to help us out on social media, at Vegas Hockey Hub. Now, as we're getting into the main question here, will the Vegas Golden Knights re-sign Jonathan Marchessault? And before we start breaking down the little parts, before we start getting into the meat and potatoes of it, I want to back up real quick, because I want to establish why Jonathan Marchessault matters so much for Vegas. I want to really explain and kind of do a deep dive just a little bit on why Jonathan Marchessault matters so much for Vegas. So in order to really do that, we have to go back just a little bit when it comes to Jonathan Marchessault. So Jonathan Marchessault, he is a longtime veteran in the NHL, but when he first entered Vegas, that was not the case. When it came to your Vegas Golden Knights, when he joined the organization on expansion draft night in 2017, he was a young guy. He was a guy who was 26 years old. He was someone who had just been in Florida, Tampa Bay, Columbus. He even had a little bit of a start in Anaheim as well as a young guy. I mean, this was a guy in Jonathan Marchessault who had really been trying to establish his footing as a NHLer. Now, before he got to Vegas, he did not play a full 82-game season up to that point. He had a little bit of games in Columbus. Then he had about a 47-game stint in Tampa Bay before playing only 75 games in Florida the season before coming to Vegas. Now, what made Jonathan Marchessault stand out was his elite scoring. Now, regardless if he was playing in Tampa or if he was playing in Florida, you could tell that he was establishing himself as a goal scorer in the league. Now, I mentioned that Tampa Bay, he only played 47 games in Tampa. That is true. But what Jonathan Marchessault did in those 47 games as a bottom six forward, he had 8 goals and 20 points in 47 games. Now, for someone who is a bottom six forward in that capacity, that is a really good season for a guy like Jonathan Marchessault. I also want to mention that when he goes to Florida and plays his one only season in Florida, he had a 30-goal season in 75 games. This was someone at Jonathan Marchessault who only at 25 years of age had a 50-point season in Florida. His career was on the upward trend before heading to Vegas. There's also the same guy, by the way, in Jonathan Marchessault, who, when you really stop and analyze it, this was a guy who he was undrafted. He was undrafted in the NHL. He was with the New York Rangers AHL team for a bit. Then I also had to mention that he was with the Columbus Blue Jackets, their AHL affiliate. and he also with Tampa Bay Lightning in their AHL affiliate for some time. As a matter of fact, Jonathan Marchessault spent 6 seasons playing minor league hockey before he really established himself as a NHLer. And I do want to quickly mention in those 7 seasons, he had 67 points, 64 points, 67 points. Jonathan Marchessault was a really good top 6 forward in the AHL. This was somebody who actually got his team to the playoffs in 4 of those seasons as well. He was a big contributor into those seasons. So why am I establishing what he did before getting to Vegas, you might ask? Because I want to establish what Jonathan Marchessault has done in his career. Because what he has done for the most part, he has established himself as somebody who can score. He is a clutch player when you need him to be. And more importantly, he is a leader. Regardless of him being an alternate captain or him not even wearing a C or an A, Jonathan Marchessault has shown that he has a leadership skill. He has qualities of a leader, regardless of where he's been. And then with Jonathan Marchessault, after being with the New York Rangers, the Columbus Blue Jackets, Tampa Bay Lightning, and then the Florida Panthers, Jonathan Marchessault would then get his opportunity to play here in Vegas. So what would happen on draft night is that the Florida left Jonathan Marchessault exposed in the NHL expansion draft. And this would come back to bite Florida in more ways than one. Because Jonathan Marchessault being left exposed after a 50-point season, he ended up being one of the most notable players and one of the players that a lot of people noticed who Vegas took on draft night. Because it's not often in an expansion draft when a team who is starting brand new gets a 50-point player in an expansion draft. It rarely ever happens, if never, in the NHL expansion draft. So for Florida to fumble the bag and allow Jonathan Marchessault to come to Vegas was a massive deal. Keep in mind that Jonathan Marchessault was going to be a firm top 6 forward when he came here to Vegas. He was already going to be a solid guy on the wings. You had David Perron, James Neal, Jonathan Marchessault, and then his Florida teammate who they took alongside Jonathan Marchessault on draft night in Riley Smith. Middle 6 forward, they were going to have, some Eric Holla. There was going to be some good players, Vadim Shiparov. There was some decent talent here in Vegas. But how are they going to gel? How are they going to have chemistry-wise? How was Jonathan Marchessault going to perform? Going from a Florida team who that season, by the way, the last season and the only season he played in Florida. This was a Florida team in 2016-2017 that ended up missing the playoffs. As a matter of fact, they had one of the worst records in the NHL. They only had about 80 points that entire year. So for Jonathan Marchessault, it would be an opportunity for him to see how he can do here in Vegas. Well, to say that Jonathan Marchessault exceeded expectations would be a massive understatement. Jonathan Marchessault, in his first season playing in Vegas, in the year of the Misfits, as it was being called, he played 77 of 82 games that year. He had 27 goals, which was only a little bit less than what he had in Florida. But he had a whopping 75 points for your Vegas Golden Knights. As a matter of fact, Jonathan Marchessault, if it hadn't been for William Karlsson, would have been the leader on the Vegas Golden Knights in points. Karlsson had 78, Marchessault had 75. And you could tell very early on that Jonathan Marchessault was here to stay as a member of the Vegas Golden Knights. Him producing, scoring points, having one heck of a line with Riley Smith and William Karlsson, who started out on the second line, then eventually got promoted to the first line in year 1. Jonathan Marchessault would be rewarded for that opportunity, as in January of 2018, he would sign a 6-year deal worth $5 million per with the Vegas Golden Knights. This is also the fact that they established himself as an elite winger in the NHL. Those 75 points put him as one of the best wingers in all of hockey in the 2017-2018 season. But how would Jonathan Marchessault do in the playoffs that year? How would Jonathan Marchessault manage to be in the NHL in his first playoff series since leaving Tampa in 2016? Well, not only would Jonathan Marchessault help the Vegas Golden Knights get to the Stanley Cup final against Washington, but in 20 playoff games, Jonathan Marchessault would have a whopping 8 playoff goals for Vegas. He would have 21 points for Vegas. So for anyone who can do simple mathematics, Jonathan Marchessault in his first playoff series for Vegas was averaging over a point per game for the Vegas Golden Knights. It's also the same Jonathan Marchessault who in that season, in that postseason, he led the entire Vegas Golden Knights in goals in that Stanley Cup playoffs. To say that he was vital and that he was a key to the Vegas Golden Knights would be a massive understatement here. But you know what? That's year one. He gets a contract extension. He plays essentially 97 games that year and scores 96 points. Well, how would Jonathan Marchessault respond after that? How would he perform after putting up essentially a 96-point season in 97 games when you combine playoffs and regular season? Well, in year two, he would play every single game for the first time in his career. He would have 25 goals. Once again, a little bit less than the year before, but that's still elite. You're having a 25-goal season, his third 25-goal season in a row. His points would dip just a little bit at 59 points. But once again, third year in a row, scoring over 50 points. And then in the playoffs, he had 4 goals in 7 games. So to put that in perspective, Jonathan Marchessault in only one round, because the Golden Knights lost in the first round that year, Jonathan Marchessault almost scored Jonathan Marchessault, when it came to 7-game series, scoring 4 goals. That is over a half a goal per game. So for Jonathan Marchessault to have 12 playoff goals in 27 playoff games for the Vegas Golden Knights, for this guy to have 27 points in 27 games for the Vegas Golden Knights, it really established the fact that Jonathan Marchessault was an elite winger, and he was still in his late 20s by this point. So how would Jonathan Marchessault respond to that? How would he perform as a member of the Vegas Golden Knights heading into the next season? Well, it's also the same Jonathan Marchessault that I do have to establish that this was somebody who was very outspoken. He was a leader in the locker room. He was also someone who was becoming quickly a fan favorite here in Vegas. Him and Carlson were by far the 2 most popular players not named Marc-Andre Fleury. This was a guy who called out the refs for the penalty on Cody Eakin against Joe Pavelski in that round that happened in 2018-2019. And I do want to quickly mention that Jonathan Marchessault, the next 2 seasons, was vital to the Vegas Golden Knights. In the shortened 2019-2020 season, because of COVID, he would play in 66 games, have 22 goals, and 47 points. Once again, his stats go down a little bit. But you also have to keep in mind that this was during a COVID-shortened season. So you have to give it a little bit of a pass. And then he played in all 20 playoff games when the Vegas Golden Knights would lose in the Western Conference Finals to the Dallas Stars in 2020. But in those playoff games, he had 10 points in 20 games. Once again, half a point per game in the playoffs for Jonathan Marchessault. So for a guy like Jonathan Marchessault, at this point, he was not only just establishing himself as an elite winger, not only was he establishing himself as one of the best players in the Golden Knights organization, but he also was top 3 and franchise leader in almost every category you can think of. Games played, goals, assists, points. I mean, this was a guy who time on ice, wins above replacement, win shares. Jonathan Marchessault and William Karlsson, and to an extent, Shea Theodore as well, they were becoming the anchors of this Vegas Golden Knights organization. They were the ones that you were seeing on every single stat when you went into the record books for the Vegas Golden Knights. And the following season, during the actual shortened, once again, 2020-2021 NHL season, he would play in 55 of 56 games for the Vegas Golden Knights that year. He would have 18 goals, which was the lowest amount of goals he scored since he did back in Tampa Bay in 2016. But once again, you have to put it into perspective. If he had played a full 82-game season, he would have been over 25 goals if you actually took it into account. Similar to the year before, if he had 22 goals in 66 games, if he had played the remaining 16 games, there is a chance that maybe Jonathan Marchessault would have been over 25 goals as well. So for him to have 18 goals and 44 points in only 55 games, that's once again over a half a point per game that season. And in the playoffs that year, he would miss one game, but in 19 games, he would have 6 goals and 9 points. So once again, almost around half a point per game in the playoffs. So he is becoming an established guy in the playoffs. He's becoming a loyalty guy for the Vegas Golden Knights, someone who the Golden Knights organization can trust, and a leader that they can depend on when it came to Vegas. But what would happen with Jonathan Marchessault the next 2 years afterwards is why I'm kind of bringing this up. So Jonathan Marchessault in 2020, 2021, he was, coming off a year where he was, over half a point per game. Well, in 2021, 2022, he would play in 76 out of 82 games. He would score 30 goals once again in his career, the first time he did it in Vegas. He would have 66 points, which was the best plateau that he had had since 2018. So Jonathan Marchessault, despite the Golden Knights missing the playoffs that year, only missed 6 games. He only had 66 points, which is well over half a point per game. And this was a guy who was establishing himself once again as an elite winger and one of the best scorers in hockey for your Vegas Golden Knights. But a lot of people were paying attention to this, that by this point, he was already in his early 30s. He is 31 by the time we're talking about this. Would his performance continue at that level for the next year? Well, in 2022, 2023, he would play once again in 76 games. He would have 28 goals, 2 less than the year before, still 25 goal scorer. He would have only 57 points, which dropped a little bit from the year before, but still over 50 points. But his playoff run is what we really have to establish. Jonathan Marchessault would lead all of the Golden Knights in 13 goals in the postseason that year. This is also the Jonathan Marchessault who, in that season, 13 goals, he was the tying goal. He was tied with Leon Draisaitl for the most goals in the playoffs. He also was second in points that year in the playoffs with 25. It's also the same Jonathan Marchessault who that season, if you combine his regular season and postseason combined, in 98 games, would have 41 goals and would have 82 points for your Vegas Golden Knights. So for Jonathan Marchessault, he had an incredible 2022-2023 campaign. For your Vegas Golden Knights, he would be rewarded for his campaign by winning the Conn Smythe Trophy, for winning the playoff MVP for your Vegas Golden Knights. So you can imagine very quickly, this was, if you combine his postseason and regular season, a 41-goal performance for Vegas. And to top it all off, he would beat his former team in Florida in the Stanley Cup Finals, which was a little bit of a cherry on top for Jonathan Marchessault and Riley Smith, who was still on the team as well. So getting into the present moment for Jonathan Marchessault, this is where the current moment needs to be addressed. So for Jonathan Marchessault, we're going to talk about what he has done at this point. Now, I do want to time date this just a little bit. This will be a timestamp that's going to be dated at right here, right now. They have finished the New York Islanders game just now. So I am basing his statistics off of what he has done up to the New York Islanders game that has recently happened. Now, for the 2023-2024 season, Jonathan Marchessault would be on the first line alongside Mark Stone and alongside Ivan Barbashev to start the year. And how would Jonathan Marchessault perform this season? How would Jonathan Marchessault play to begin the year? Well, not only would he score a goal on opening night, on banner night for your Vegas Golden Knights, but in October, he would score goals against Winnipeg and Chicago, and then have assists against Philadelphia and LA. So in the month of November for Jonathan Marchessault, he would have 5 points for your Vegas Golden Knights. Now, I do want to keep in mind that in 10 games, having 5 points, that is a half a point per game for your Vegas Golden Knights. So to begin the year, Jonathan Marchessault was averaging half a point per game. I want you to keep that in mind for what I'm about to talk about next. Because when the Winnipeg Jets went into town on November 2nd, I was at this game, by the way. I was screaming my head off the entire time. He would score a hat trick against Winnipeg. So he would get his 4th, 5th, and 6th goal of the season in the same game against Winnipeg. And then when they shut out Colorado 2 days later, he would pick up an assist in that game. But here's the unfortunate part about Jonathan Marchessault. He would back up these amazing performances by not registering a point in 4 straight games. So Jonathan Marchessault would have 1 or 2 games where he would be phenomenal for Vegas. But then he would have these droughts. Similar to what happened in the beginning of the year. He had that goal against Seattle on opening night, and then would have back-to-back games where he would not score at all. Like, you actually have to go to Montreal late in the middle of November, where he scored his first goal since that hat trick against Winnipeg. And then against Philadelphia, he would have a 2-goal performance. Okay, picking up some momentum. And then he would not pick up a single point for the remainder of November. So he went on a 4-game drought after having a 2-goal performance against Philadelphia. And in some way, this has actually been somewhat of a critique against Jonathan Marchessault. because Jonathan Marchessault is an elite winger. He is a great goal scorer. Like I mentioned, last year, if you combine his postseason stats and regular season stats, he had 41 goals in 98 games. Jonathan Marchessault showed last year that he's still an elite scorer. That's why he won the Conn Smythe. But let's get into what's happened recently, because I talked about what happened in October. I mentioned November. Now I just got into December. Because December, he had 6 goals and 9 points for your Vegas Golden Knights. So as he got to the end of November, he essentially would have 9 goals and 14 points for your Vegas Golden Knights. But this would be in 24 games. So that's a little over half a point per game. Now, what would happen in December? Well, he had a little bit of a streak going. He had a 2-goal performance against Washington. Then he had an assist against St. Louis, followed up by a goal the next game when they did the back-to-back. He would have a 2-goal performance against San Jose. Fantastic. He's building up momentum. Then he would have a 3-point night against Calgary. So for Jonathan Marchessault, it looked like the month of December was by far the best month for Jonathan Marchessault. But then there were some nights where in Dallas, they scored 6 goals, Vegas did, and Jonathan Marchessault registered 0 points on the night. Or there was times where against Carolina and Buffalo, he didn't get a point at all. But then he would score a goal against Ottawa. He would get shut out against Florida. He would not be on the score sheet at all. But then he would score 2 goals against Tampa. To me, it just established that when it comes to Jonathan Marchessault, he's he's streaky at times. Yes, his stats look phenomenal. But then when you actually watch the games and you study the game logs and you actually examine Jonathan Marchessault, he goes on these hot and cold runs where he'll be multiple goal performances followed by some games where he's barely noticeable at all. There was also that time where he had an assist against Anaheim where they lost, and then in a very back and forth game against LA, only put up 1 shot on net against LA. So in the month of December for Jonathan Marchessault, he had 8 goals, which by the way sound phenomenal considering they played over a dozen games. He averaged a point per game in December. But I also have to mention that Washington, San Jose, and Calgary, alongside Tampa, that he scored 9 points of those 13 in just 4 games. So his stats look great, but then when you actually do a bit of digging and actually dig a little bit, you have to see that Jonathan Marchessault does have some moments where he doesn't show up. And then you had the 2 most recent games where he did not score against Florida despite putting up 6 shots. And the Winter Classic where they got shut out, he put up 7 shots on net, but just couldn't get it past Joey Daccord. So for Jonathan Marchessault at this point, he has 17 goals, 11 assists for 29 points. So I want to leave this up to you based off of everything I have said here. If you are the Vegas Golden Knights and you've seen Jonathan Marchessault the past 7 years, would you re-sign him? If you're Kelly McCrimmon, if you're George McPhee, you're Bill Foley, are you going to re-sign a guy who, despite his stats, which look great on paper, and yes, he's a fan favorite, he's a leader in the locker room, he's an elite winger, he's 33 years old. This is a guy who, statistically, is going to go down if you understand NHL hockey. The older you get, unless you're Joe Pavelski, because of course he doesn't matter, but unless you are someone that just doesn't age, your stats are going to decline steadily. It's not going to be rapid, but steadily over time, It's going to be like a ladder. You're just going to go down a little by little. Now, I'm going to leave that up to you on what you would do if you are the Vegas Golden Knights, what you would do if you're Bill Foley and George McPhee. I've laid out the evidence. I've given you the reasons why and the reasons why you shouldn't. It's up to you to decide. So until next time, I'm your host, Ian Rachiele. This is Vegas Hockey Hub. In our next episode, we're going to be breaking down some really entertaining content here on Vegas Hockey Hub. So until next time, continue watching hockey, go support junior hockey, and go Knights, go.
PR Connections Radio thanks you for watching this podcast. Check out more episodes of this show and our others at prconnectionsradio.com.